It's Thursday, the 17th of March. Good morning, Europe. Let's bring you up to date with our top stories on Russia's war in Ukraine.
I think he is a war criminal.
US President Joe Biden calls Putin a war criminal as the US approves $1 billion for Ukraine aid. Moscow hits back, accusing the US of killing thousands around the world and insisting Ukraine must become a neutral state. Emotional family reunions. 2 British dual nationals returned to the UK after years held as prisoners in Iran.
US President Joe Biden has labelled Russian leader Vladimir Putin a war criminal, in a move likely to escalate diplomatic tensions even further. It's the first time he has used such language to condemn Putin. The remark, an off-the-cuff response to a reporter's question at the White House.
I think he is a war criminal.
The White House later said Biden was speaking from his heart. However, the Kremlin has called it unforgivable rhetoric. The US president had earlier signed off an $800 million security aid package, bringing the US's total contribution to more than $1 billion. It's a key element in helping Ukraine get a long-range air defense system and access to drones. But its President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's still not enough.
To establish a no-fly zone over Ukraine in order to save people, is it too much to ask? Humanitarian no-fly zone is a condition under which Russia will no longer be able to terrorize our peaceful cities every day and night.
In Moscow, President Vladimir Putin delivered a stark warning to so-called Russian traitors.
The collective West is trying to split our society, speculating on military losses, on socio-economic consequences of sanctions, to provoke a civil confrontation in Russia, and using its fifth column, strives to achieve its goal, and the goal is one, the destruction of Russia.
Russian experts say the message was chilling, fearing it could lead to a new round of repression against those who don't agree with the regime.
Russian shelling continues as efforts to negotiate an end to the fighting go on. A 35-hour curfew in Kiev ends Thursday morning. During that period, several apartments were hit on the outskirts of the capital. A tweet from Ukraine's foreign minister revealing that a theatre in besieged Mariupol has been destroyed has sparked fears for the fate of hundreds taking refuge there. The building, which had been used as a shelter, had the word "children" written in large white letters on the pavement in front of and behind the theatre. Amid the constant shelling, there are mixed messages emerging from peace negotiations. Talk of a 15-point plan has been described by Ukraine as just the requesting position of the Russian side. But talk of Ukraine becoming a neutral country appears to be gaining some traction.
Neutral status is now being seriously discussed along, of course, with security guarantees. That's exactly what President Putin said at one of these news conferences in February. Any possible options, any generally accepted security guarantees for Ukraine and all countries, including Russia, except for the expansion of NATO.
Negotiations are ongoing, negotiations for the sake of Ukraine. My priorities in the negotiations are absolutely clear. The end of the war, security guarantees, sovereignty, restoration of territorial integrity.
Prospects for a diplomatic breakthrough remain uncertain given the gulf between Ukraine's demand for the invading forces to withdraw completely and Russia's suspected aim for replacing Kiev's westward-looking government with a pro-Moscow regime.
This is Chernihiv, just 140 kilometres north of Kyiv, where this morning at least 10 people were killed after being hit by a Russian shell while standing in line to buy bread. The city has been surrounded by Russian forces for several days and has suffered several shellings on a daily basis. Many have hit residential buildings. Meanwhile, residents of Kyiv woke once again to the sound of sirens. Local authorities say there were 2 casualties after a 12-storey apartment building was struck by shrapnel before bursting into flames. A curfew will remain in place in the Ukrainian capital until 7 a.m. on Thursday. Russia has released videos showing Western weaponry reportedly abandoned by Ukrainians in the eastern Donbass region. But the intensified shelling on every front has not translated into substantial advances on the ground. Reports of some progress in peace talks. Dmitry Peskov, press secretary for Russia's President Vladimir Putin, says a neutral military status for Ukraine is being negotiated on both sides.
This is the option that is really being discussed now and can be considered as a real compromise. The situation concerning Ukraine can be improved by agreements reached at talks between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations.
Meanwhile, in Dnipro, Ukraine's 4th largest city, 20,000 volunteer fighters have joined Ukrainian troops after the city's airport was hit by 2 Russian bombs. The resistance have now barricaded the city in preparation for an attack.
Well, NATO defence ministers met yesterday ahead of 2 extraordinary summits here in Brussels, a NATO summit and EU Council summit, joined by US President Joe Biden. We heard from Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, who talked about the need for a reset for Europe's collective defence in light of the growing threat from Russia against NATO. He reiterated NATO's position regarding Article 5, that an attack on one country is an attack on us all. And he also made the point that NATO is still deeply concerned about a potential false flag operation involving chemical weapons from Russia in the coming days and weeks. Meanwhile, talks between Russia and Ukraine at a possible ceasefire are said to be going well at this point, but there's no other news about anything materialising just yet. Shona Murray, Euronews, Brussels.
The United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has arrived in Bulgaria for an official visit. During his stay in Sofia, the Bulgarian government will seek support from Washington for securing its airspace. More than 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Bulgaria still uses its Soviet-era MiG-29s for policing of its airspace. Their maintenance was carried out in Russia and Belarus, but after the conflict in Ukraine, this task has been extremely difficult. In 2019, the Bulgarian government finalized a contract with the United States for the purchase of 8 F-16 fighter jets in order to upgrade its combat capabilities. However, the coronavirus pandemic delayed their construction. The main topic between the Bulgarian government and Austin Lloyd will be the security of Bulgarian sky. This was what the Bulgarian Prime Minister Kirill Petkov announced days before the visit. However, even if the alliance decides to send aircraft to Bulgaria, the question of who will pilot them is still open for a discussion. The number of Bulgarian pilots that are training to operate F-16s is still very insufficient. And the political parties here in Bulgaria are still divided over the country's position as a NATO member state with the face of war just a few hundred kilometers from its borders. Some parties that are described as pro-Russian, both in the ruling coalition and in opposition, have been vocally against the imposing of new Russian sanctions and against deployment of military troops and equipment here in Bulgaria. However, the new Bulgarian defense minister sees the visit of Lloyd Austin here in Sofia as a strong commitment to the NATO member states from the United States.